I've always known there was something off about Middleditch High, with its eerie hallways and the musty smell that permeates the old brick walls. The worst of it, however, comes from a small, seldom-mentioned closet tucked away under the staircase in the abandoned West Wing. I first heard about it in a whispered rumor, one that chilled my bones, and piqued my curiosity too intensely. They said it was once the janitor's closet, but not just any janitor, Mr. Loomis, a man whose presence still haunted the school decades after he was fired. Today, drawn by a mix of fear and thrill, I find myself standing before the closet door. The paint is peeling, creating patterns that almost look like faces screaming in agony. I push open the door, and a cold gust of wind blows out, extinguishing the light from my flashlight for a moment. When the light flickers back to life, I see the narrow space, stretching impossibly far back, far deeper than the school's blueprint would allow. Stepping inside, the door slams shut behind me, and I'm enveloped by darkness. The air is thick, musty, filled with the smell of old, wet mops and something faintly metallic. I flick on my flashlight again, revealing a corridor lined with doors. Each door is marked with a classroom number, but these are numbers I've never seen on any school map. I open one door, peering inside. It looks like a classroom, but twisted, wrong. The desks are arranged in a circle, each one scratched and covered in what looks like dried blood. On the blackboard, written over and over, is, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." A shuffling sound makes me turn. Down the hall, the flicker of a shadow. Heart pounding, I follow. Each classroom reveals another horror, a science lab with jars filled with unidentifiable specimens, an art room where the paintings scream silently from their canvases. The deeper I go, the more the air feels alive, buzzing with a silent scream. Then I see him. Mr. Loomis, the janitor, at the end of the corridor. He's tall, his uniform grimy, and in his hand he clutches a rusty old mop. His eyes, hollow and dark, fix on me. "You're late," he rasps, his voice echoing off the walls. I try to run, but the floors have turned slick, sticky under my feet. He advances, slow and deliberate. "It's time to clean up," he hisses. Panicking, I dart into the nearest room, a library with books that seem to moan as I brush past them. In the center, a large tome rests open. The pages flutter as if caught in a breeze, and I see it's a logbook. The names of students, dozens of them, all marked with a red X. My fingers tremble as I turn the pages, the reality dawning on me. These students had all disappeared without a trace. I hear the squeak of his mop getting closer. With no way out, I brace myself against the shelves, pushing them over. Books cascade down, and I use the moment to slip past him, sprinting back toward the closet door. The corridor seems to stretch and distort as I run, the screams of the damned classrooms growing louder. Finally, I reach the door, throwing it open to the dim light of the school hallway. I don't stop running until I'm out of the building, the fresh air filling my lungs, chasing away the stench of decay. Breathing hard, I look back at the school. From the outside, it seems normal, untouched by the horrors within. But I know better. I know that deep within Middleditch High, behind a simple janitor's closet door, lies a twisted version of this place, overseen by a malevolent spirit who is far from done with his duties. I can never tell anyone. Who would believe me? But I know I have to warn the new students, somehow, because somewhere in that dark, twisted school, Mr. Loomis is preparing for his next cleanup, and I fear what will happen if he ever runs out of messes to clean. For as long as I can remember, Mr. Harrow's house next door stood unusually silent. Even as a child, I never heard the typical sounds of domestic life emanating from within. No television buzz, no clattering dishes, not even the echoes of conversation. The windows, perpetually curtained, sometimes flickered with shadows that seemed too fluid, too quick to be human. The neighborhood often whispered about the reclusive old man and his eerily quiet home, crafting tales spookier than the last. It was an unspoken agreement among us kids to avoid the place, especially after dusk. But nothing piqued my curiosity, or my fear, more than the night a piercing scream shattered our quiet street's calm. It was just past midnight, and the sound was so raw, so desperate, that it rooted me to the spot in my bedroom. The scream seemed to come from Mr. Harrow's house. I peered out, heart pounding, as the silence swiftly closed back in, like water settling after a thrown stone. That was the moment I decided to investigate, against every instinct screaming at me to do otherwise. The next morning, with the street bathed in sunlight and normalcy, I approached Mr. Harrow's front door. The closer I got, the more oppressive the silence became. It felt like walking into thick, unseen fog. I knocked, hesitatingly at first, then with more force. There was no response, not even the sound of footsteps. It was as if my knocks were swallowed by the door itself. With a growing sense of dread, I tried the handle. To my surprise, it turned under my hand, and the door creaked open onto an abyss of silence, so deep it buzzed in my ears. Inside, the air was cool and stale. The hallway ahead, shadowed and unwelcoming. "Mr. Harrow?" I called out, but my voice made no sound. It was as though I had become mute. As I ventured deeper into the house, the shadows grew denser, more animated. I could almost feel them brushing against me, their cold touch sending shivers down my spine. I stumbled upon the living room where the curtains were drawn tight, but it was the pictures on the walls that halted my steps. They were all of Mr. Harrow, but with every progression in age, he appeared increasingly distraught, his eyes wide with terror. In the most recent photo, his features were almost entirely distorted by fear. Then I heard it, a low moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was a sound full of such anguish and despair that I covered my ears, but I felt the vibration through the floorboards. I followed it, each step more reluctant than the last, down to the basement, where the moan grew into a cacophony of silent screams. The basement was a labyrinth of old furniture and boxes, and at its center, a bizarre contraption that hummed with an eerie energy. It was a machine, large and metallic, with tubes and wires that webbed across the ceiling and walls. As I approached, the air grew denser, harder to breathe. The machine pulsed, and with each pulse, the shadows danced more frenetically. There, taped to the side of the device, was a journal, Mr. Harrow's. It detailed his experiments with sound, how he'd discovered a way to absorb it, to harness it for energy. But the machine had grown beyond his control, consuming not just sound, but life itself, its hunger insatiable. I slammed the journal shut, the silence enveloping me thicker than before. Panic set in as I realized the house was alive, feeding off every sound, every scream. I turned to run, but the shadows moved to block my path, swirling around me like dark water. I never remembered how I got out, only that I found myself back in my room, the door to Mr. Harrow's house firmly closed, as if it had never been opened. The quiet was deeper now, suffocating, as if warning me never to speak of what I'd found. But some nights, when the world is especially silent, I swear I hear the distant hum of Mr. Harrow's machine, and the soft, despairing moans of the shadows trapped within the walls of the house that devours all sound, and more. In the heart of an ancient city, cloaked in the mists of forgotten times, there stood a quaint little antique shop, nestled between the remnants of cobblestone pathways and ivy-clad buildings. Its windows were dusted with the sands of time, and its door creaked on hinges that whispered tales of centuries past. The shop was a trove of mysteries, each artifact holding a story, a secret, a whisper from the past. But of all the enigmas it harbored, none was as unnerving as the painting that hung on the farthest wall of the dimly lit room. The painting was ensconced in an ornate frame, tarnished with age, its gold leaf peeling off like aged skin. The canvas depicted a scene of haunting beauty, a shadowy forest at twilight, where the trees seemed to contort in agony, reaching out with their gnarled branches as if to warn, or perhaps ensnare. At the heart of the forest was a clearing, and in it, a figure cloaked in darkness. Its features blurred, yet its eyes, oh, those eyes. They glowed with a malevolent light, piercing through the canvas, watching, waiting. The legend of the painting was as old as the shop itself. It was said to be cursed, or perhaps possessed. The tales varied, but the essence remained. Those who gazed upon the painting found themselves haunted by visions, tormented by nightmares, and in some cases, driven to madness. It was as if the painting fed on their fears, their sanity, drawing them into its twisted realm. The shopkeeper, a wizened old man with eyes that had seen too much, seldom spoke of the painting. He warned those who asked to steer clear, to admire it from afar, but never to stare too deeply into its abyss. But warnings are often but whispers in the wind to those enticed by the allure of the forbidden. It was on a stormy night, when the rain danced upon the cobblestones and the lightning painted the sky with streaks of terror, that Ethan, a young man with a penchant for the occult, entered the shop. He was drawn not by the promise of shelter from the storm, but by the tales of the painting he had heard whispered in the shadowed corners of dimly lit bars. The shopkeeper eyed him warily, as Ethan's gaze swept across the room, finally resting upon the painting. "Beware, young sir," the old man murmured, a note of fear lacing his words. "Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some secrets best left untold." But Ethan was not to be deterred. He approached the painting, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and fascination. As he stared into the canvas, he felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of being drawn into the depths of the forest, into the very eyes of the figure that lurked within. The shopkeeper found Ethan hours later, staring blankly at the painting, his eyes wide with an unspoken horror. He spoke not a word, responding to neither query nor command. It was as if his soul had been ensnared, trapped within the canvas. In the days that followed, Ethan was consumed by the painting. He spoke of voices in the night, of shadows that moved of their own accord, of eyes that watched him from the darkness. His descent into madness was swift, a chilling testament to the power that lay within the cursed canvas. And then, one night, he vanished. His room bore the signs of a struggle, but of Ethan, there was no trace. The only clue left behind was a scrap of paper, upon which was scrawled a single, chilling sentence. "It watches from the painting, and now, it watches through my eyes." The painting hangs still in the antique shop, its secrets untold, its curse unbroken. The shopkeeper no longer speaks of it, and those who know of its legend steer clear. But the painting waits, patient and hungry, for the next pair of eyes to lock onto its own, to be drawn into its embrace. And so, the legend grows. a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurk within beauty, of the shadows that dwell in the heart of art. For in the depths of the possessed painting, there lies a darkness that consumes, a malevolence that watches, waiting for the next soul to ensnare in its twisted grasp.